Hello, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful session with my colleague Alex Hooke from Social Traders. We're going to be doing a recap of the presentation we did a couple of weeks ago now, Alex, for the Queensland Social Enterprise's 10th anniversary celebration, which we ran at Mahaba. I'm going to just announce that we've got the Minister Farmer in the room, which we're very pleased to have with us today. And she has to race off for a meeting. So we'll do a quick acknowledgement of country. We might circle back to that afterwards so that we can do a little bit of a deeper dive. But I just want to acknowledge that I'm standing on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people today. And we do like to take a moment to pay respects to elders, past, present, and those who are emerging, the Jarjans, who will be the custodians of this land going forward. Minister Farmer, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you with us for this session. If you need to unmute.
I do. No, thank you so much, Elise. And look, I too begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which we are all joining this meeting and paying my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I support Voice to Parliament for Australia's First Nations people. And look, thank you so much for the chance to do this today. And I'm actually in Parliament this week. And so I thought, no, I'm at least going to make sure I can say hello to you all and say job well done, because as Elise knows, I'm just really chuffed, you know, that we've got this quite significant commitment to social enterprise in Queensland and that it gets to be in my portfolio. And I want to say a very happy birthday to QSEC, which has just been a really great organisation to work with. And, you know, 10 years has seen a lot of growth in social enterprise in general, and it's still such an emerging kind of area in our community. So to have $8 million to spend and to work with QSEC to say, well, what is the best way to do this, to actually mean that it's supportive to the very big range of social enterprises that that we see operating in Queensland now. And as many of you know, that's meant grants, it's meant well, social traders, you know, we've actually done work with social traders to improve the capability of government procurement, and we want that to flow on to corporate procurement as well, marketing and capability of the sector, as well as funding QSEC, which will go through until September next year. And we've sort of been discovering things on the way, Elise, haven't we? But it's been the greatest joy for me to be travelling around Queensland and actually meeting many social enterprises and just seeing the impact that you have. In fact, I was just literally in Parliament. I was contributing to a bill about waste management, and it's introducing the concept of circular economy. And I was able to talk about Yaz's, you know, massive social enterprise economy. So you've got those big operators like that, and then equally you've got, you know, one person organisations who are nevertheless making an enormous impact. And so I just wanted to take this just couple of minutes that I've got to say we are so proud of what you're doing. We are so proud to really shine a light on your work and to really increase that awareness in the general community of what it is you actually do. And you know, we've been particularly interested to just see the partnerships that are springing up with the, I always say to Elise and Yaz, social enterprise gets 2 bites at the government funding cherry. You get all the small business funding, and then you get the social enterprise funding at all as well. But it's been great to see even, you know, some of the big corporate partners and big peak bodies who are looking to social enterprise to do things like solving workforce shortages. And it's so common now for me to hear a conversation which goes, I just did not know social enterprises even exist, and I can't believe I've missed out on them all these years. And people are so excited to be meeting you. So, so as you can tell, I'm very excited about what's happening and about the future. So well done to QSEC, but well done to all of you. And I think we are just got so many great journeys ahead of us.
Thank you so much, Minister. We're very appreciative of the work that you do, and we're very excited actually about your new portfolio of youth justice, quite frankly.
Yes, yes.
And there's going to be so much more work that social enterprise
absolutely
and actually help government celebrate and shine a light on the great work that's already happening in the sector. So thank you very much for joining us. I know you've got to race off.
Sorry, everybody. Hope you have a good session. See you later. Bye. Video. Right.
And we're very, very grateful to Minister Farmer and the Department of Employment and Small Business actually for the work that they have done in this space, helping us to thrive. And we'll actually unpack that a little bit more. I'm going to share my screen now. Alex Hooke is here with me too, so we'll get to introduce Alex in a minute too. But I want to circle back round to the welcome to country, or the acknowledgement of country that we did briefly at the beginning. It does actually mean a lot to us here at QSEC, and I know throughout the social enterprise sector, 10%, and as we'll learn through this presentation, of our members are actually Indigenous businesses, and it's growing. It's growing. The work that social enterprise Indigenous businesses do has been around for a long time. The term social enterprise is quite new, but the principles that drive what social enterprise stands for has been practiced for many, 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 many eons, and not just in our Indigenous First Nations people here, but across the globe. So I just wanted to take that moment to dig a little bit deeper into that statement before we launch into this. And Alex, if we could bring you to the table now too. Alex Hooke is my dear friend and colleague at Social Traders. And we describe ourselves as the family of social enterprises. Social Traders is very much part of that family, and they look after the certification of social enterprises. And we stand here together, shoulder to shoulder, and we also want to acknowledge the great support that Westpac Foundation has provided to help us bring this together. Alex, do you want to say a few words before we kick off?
Happy to kick off, but yeah, great to be here, and it's great to be able to show this group and those watching the recording what we went through to mark the occasion and celebrate the 10-year anniversary of QSEC, and I suppose just celebrate the function that QSEC play in bringing the sector together and moving the social enterprise movement forward in Queensland. So nice to be a part of it and contribute in our small way. So thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure, and there's been a lot of people that have made this movement happen, as I hope you'll actually understand by the end of this presentation. It doesn't just rest on the shoulders of QSEC. In fact, well before QSEC was formed, people were working on this this movement for change for a very long time. So I'll take you through a little bit about who QSEC is. For those of you who don't know what the Queensland Social Enterprise Council stands for, we are a member peak body for social enterprises in Queensland, and we have these 5 pillars of support that we provide for the sector growth. We advocate, obviously you saw Minister Farmer joining us here today. It's not just Minister Farmer we work with departments, as she mentioned, the circular economy unit that's been set up in the waste department. We work with Arts Queensland, we work with so many different organisations within the department. And we really try and drive through the message that social enterprise is not just a one-size-fits-all. It's not just about, jobs and growth. It's actually a very diverse group of people. And we bring so much more to the table than just the single bottom line, the impact that we can create through society, through all of those different departments. And in each corner, every corner of the state is really quite diverse and amazing. So we do a lot of advocacy work. We support social enterprises in their growth and also support them in their journey to maturity. We do this in a number of ways. We have a knowledge bank that we've set up, an online learning portal, and we not only teach people about what social enterprise is, so people outside of the sector, but also help social enterprises on their journey as they grow and get better. We connect social enterprises on the ground through networks, and this is a big piece of our work. We do a lot of connection and engagement with regional centres particularly, and we also love social enterprises. So we do a lot of promotions and a lot of work really trying to help people understand from across the whole breadth of society about what the social enterprise model looks like and why we think it's the gold standard really of business models. Alex, you want to talk a little bit about social traders?
Yeah, thank you. And there is some really good synergy in what QSEC do and what social traders do. So essentially, social traders are a independent, not-for-profit, so charitable DGR1 status organisation that was set up to support social enterprise as a sector grow. We'll talk a bit about the history in a minute. But these days, we essentially use social procurement as the lever to support social enterprises become more sustainable businesses and therefore more impactful through that growth. We do 4 key things. We also advocate for policy. We support QSEC as our peak to do broader advocacy. We're really working on the procurement function as well as supporting the broader social enterprise support from government, but around procurement, looking for government to buy more from social enterprise and help push that policy forward to support social enterprise. We certify, as Elise said before, and then we help strengthen social enterprises so that they're more able to sell into the market, but also that there is a brand around social enterprise and that genuine social enterprises can have a logo and external verification that they are indeed walking their talk. The other thing we do is work with business and government members, and we help them change the way they buy things so that they deeply embed social enterprise into their supply chain, again, based on that idea that by winning work, social enterprises can become more sustainable businesses and therefore more impactful. And like QSEC connect lots of social enterprises, we too look to connect social enterprises with those business and government members. So specific around trying to activate corporate Australia and government procurement as a lever for social enterprise to grow.
Thanks so much, Alex. And as Alex said, the certification part is actually really important for QSEC members and for social enterprises to really lean into that space of legitimacy. You know, we can all talk the talk really well, but, you know, how are we walking the walk? And that's what really social traders helps us to understand the process of being able to stand up really positively in that space and say, yes, we are actually doing what we say we do. We're going to talk you through a little bit of a timeline, and we'll do this in tag team sort of form, because it's not just, as I said before, not just one actor who's played a part in the development of social enterprise. In fact, Queensland was the first state to really lean into the social enterprise model. And that was largely on the shoulders of Dr. Ingrid Burkett and Dave Langdon very early on. They were really the thought leaders that really helped us to shape what the terminology meant and how it could really help support businesses from a whole range of backgrounds, support community. And in 2001, Brisbane City Council, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Alex? They were the first, we think, procurement opportunity.
We think, we do qualify that, but we think that, you know, that's, and we still point to the relationship BCC has with Nunda Co-op as what we think of one of the first purposeful social procurement contracts was in Australia.
So we started small, but it soon grew, which was good. And some of those, the people, the thought leaders I mentioned before that sat around the table actually formed a group called the New Mutualists Group. And they formed around the idea that this social tendering, as they used to call it back then, could really lend a hand in shaping what the communities of Queensland wanted to be. Some of the political forums at the time was quite a difficult, off the back of Joh Bjelke-Petersen era. Some of the community services had been challenged with funding, and they had to start to lean into that space of earning revenue. And from that, this movement really grew like Topsy in Queensland. So we're quite grateful for that opportunity to lean into this space. Ingrid Burkett and Dave Langdon actually penned a couple of very interesting and pivotal books, which we're actually digitising now, and we're going to be putting in the history pin defining social enterprise, which we gave away, like Alex is showing that book right now. We gave away on the evening last Friday, some of the early work of Ingrid Burkett saying, this is actually what we think social enterprise is. And we've tested that over many years. I think we're almost there with a definition, which is really great, some 20 years later. But it comes up time and time again, actually having a definition to lean on, really working through what the legitimacy of the opportunity is one of the key pillars that Social Traders actually helps us define. And then they released a guide to social tendering, which I hadn't ever seen. And I think you saw either, Alex, until that night. What an amazing opportunity to actually look back in time. It's almost like a time capsule. What were we thinking around social tendering? It was super amazing to have that document there. We're actually digitizing it. We're going to be putting it on the history pin, and it's going to be one of those documents, I think, that we'll come back to. And I said to Alex, I wonder what's changed. If anything's changed, we had that little moment together. Alex, you want to talk about Social Traders starting in down in Victoria?
Yeah, just for context, I suppose around the same time, 2008, the Victorian government and philanthropy invested in Social Traders being formed off the back of work being done with Brotherhood of St Lawrence and Mark Daniels, who was the kind of first employee of Social Traders back then, really acknowledging that there is a sector, they need infrastructure, they need support systems, and intermediaries are needed for this sector to thrive. And so that's why essentially Social Traders was started to support the growth of the social enterprise sector as a whole. And a great example, albeit not in Queensland, of where government and philanthropy can come together and support that systems change and support that broader sector movement.
Yeah, and I think Social Traders is really pivotal in helping wriggle on the social enterprise movement across the nation from their base in Victoria. And certainly we lean on Victoria quite a lot, even to this day, around the funding of Social Traders, particularly to really help us access the work that needs to be done here in Queensland. From that, we also saw federal government weigh in first time around the social enterprise movement through the CEDA funding. And so there's still one organisation that I know of around today that's really still in this space, which is CEFA, but SVA, which also does play a part in social funding still, but to a lesser degree, and Foresters, sadly, which is not has not survived the test of time. But that CEDA funding was really the first federal government interest that we saw. But in 2011, we saw the development of the Department of Employment, Economic Development and Innovation. And this was really where we started to see some action in state government. So when that group was formed, you can see the nexus of the interesting title choices for that department really helped us to clarify what social enterprise could do for government when they were working in the community space and really trying to leverage their funds. So that was a really interesting time where there was some movement from ministerial departments, and BCC was also looking at some of the targets that they were setting, and there was a nice coming together of industry and interest around procurement. Alex, did you want to talk a little bit about the social enterprise targets that was set with BCC?
Yeah, it's a great point in time. We started the timeline with a first contract back in 2001. BCC are a really interesting leader in social procurement, and I mentioned Mark Daniels in the starting of Social Traders. I remember him talking about even bringing up representatives from the Victorian government to see what BCC were doing around this time, 2010, 2011 sort of time, and they have led in social procurement, and interestingly, only over the last couple of years, started to work with Social Traders to say what's next. Originally we were doing it ourselves. Now we're looking to support, to continue to engage more enterprises, get more enterprises certified, and push the envelope. So, especially as we were in the basement of the town hall the other week, it was worth pointing out BCC as a real champion in this space. In talking to the procurement team, in just clarifying when these different things were published and what the values were, they noted that actually they were publishing social enterprise spend in the annual report years prior to 2011. which is interesting, and obviously spending with social enterprises well before, but then built up to publicly announcing a target of $1 million. And then over the years, that has gone, up to 4 million, and then stayed at 4 million for quite a few years. It went to 7 million. They've just published a new target being 10 million, and they've outstripped that the last 2 financial years in their spend. So exciting as an example, both as a front runner, also a bit of a playbook for others that may need to set a target, start spending, start reporting on spend, pick a target, build the target, continue to improve over time. So, but I really, we talk about taking a leadership position in social procurement, and in doing so, giving credibility and qualifying social enterprise as a sector and a group of suppliers that are worth noting. And that's essentially what BCC did through that first target and continue to do to today.
And I guess that also galvanised support in regional areas, and particularly around Southeast Queensland, which is, obviously as a volunteer movement around the new mutualists and, emerging sector leaders. They started where they lived, where they knew. So Southeast Queensland Network started to establish, and that was the real first coalition of the willing, if you want to put it in a term, to help form what QSEC became in 2013. I think the first real meetings were held in 2011 and 2012, and they were the initializing sort of thought process of, well, if we had a peak body, what would it look like? What would we do? What would be a vision for what we wanted to see achieve? And then in 2013, QSEC was physically formed, and that we got a hand down from the Incorporation Association certificate in our hot little hands. But it's interesting to note that the School for Social Enterprise started, and Alan English is one of the supporters of this movement for some time, and even years before that. But as a chair of that movement, School for Social Enterprise was really a groundbreaking piece of development that all those sector leaders, those early sector leaders, came through and gave it a galvanizing force of a real union, a real unification of what we wanted to stand for. And Alan English was a real thought leader at that time around bringing people together around education. You want to talk the next point around Social Traders Connect program, Alex?
Yeah, Social Traders have done a whole range of different things to try and support the sector from that original remit of whatever it needs really to support the social enterprise sector in Australia. And in 2015, started to think, well, there might be something in this social procurement idea. Let's test it. It was originally a Connect program as a pilot, and we signed on 4 initial corporates to help pilot this idea that we could work with them, help them change their procurement behaviours, and they could buy more from social enterprises. And we thought they were really worth calling out who those 4 were. So one was Lendlease, who have had a great amount of different social procurement case studies and examples in Queensland, and are very engaged in the Queensland market. Some case studies with Natura Pacific and others on our website. One was Australia Post, also active in the Queensland market and help enterprises, made a whole bunch of trolleys for their Redcliffe facility, and have done a huge amount of social procurement, even releasing their own white paper in about 2018 around why social procurement as a lever for Australia Post to be doing the right thing for their communities. One was Mirvac, who there's a current, they've just invested in supplier development program through Social Traders, and there's an expression of interest for enterprises that want to work with them to go through that program. That's open till the end of this week for any certified enterprises wanting to apply for that, but continue to invest in the sector. And the 4th was Westpac, and they, the Westpac Foundation have sponsored this event. They've sponsored the 2, the QSEC celebrations, and really commit to that, organising infrastructure, the peak body as representative and an important galvanising force for the sector. And all 4 of those corporates still work with Social Traders all these years on. are still continually trying to push forward their efforts in buying more from social enterprise. So just thought they were worth calling out, an interesting sign that what happened as just an idea and a pilot project in 2015 actually became our whole business model essentially in 2017, and still with some iterations is what we do today.
Yeah, it's so good to hear how that actually formed, and some of those industry partners being so committed to the sector that they're still turning up today. The Queensland government hosted a procurement expo in 2016. Social Traders was right there alongside. I think it was Leanne Enoch, who's the minister at the time. And then we also had regional networks starting to emerge. So as this noise got bigger, as QSEC started to form, we had social enterprise network in the tropics, in Sunshine Coast, in Logan. Those really started to galvanise and form as well. So you could see that there was a groundswell of movement actually really taking shape. And kudos to the state government and Shannon Fentiman at the time. That helped to really galvanise support for a round table, which was very egalitarian and really distributive, and really helped to bring a diverse group of voices together around the Queensland Jobs Report and a social enterprise strategy, which was released in 2019. But all that groundwork was done in 2018, leading on from the growing momentum for change. Alex, you want to talk to the next one?
Yeah, and then as we said, Social Traders started in Victoria. Most of the funding was coming from philanthropy and Victorian government, but in 2019, expanded out and set up an office. I was lucky enough to be the first employee in Queensland, so I've really enjoyed the last kind of 4 years in working directly with QSEC and building the market up here. I think the important thing is that from the get-go, there was an MOU in place, and we've worked hand in hand to make sure that we're in an under-resourced sector, we're complementary and making sure there's not a duplication of efforts, and we're working together, hopefully, for the best outcomes for the broader sector. Yeah, absolutely. And back to Ellen English again in 2019, the English Family Foundation really supported the Stand Up Social Enterprise project, which helped to underpin what needed to happen now. It was a very broad and deep conversation that was across the whole of Queensland and helped us to reach into very many different regional communities. And we held this fabulous unconference up at Sunshine Coast, which really helped not just the sector leaders here in Queensland, but people from across the nation came to brainstorm, what is this sector all about? How do we actually get together, and where do we move from here? Tom Allen was quite instrumental in galvanising a voice around what would it look like if we had the Social Enterprise World Forum coming together. And we actually took that as a bit of a stream at the unconference and really helped to unpack what the bid would look like and how we'd move forward with that. So that was really groundbreaking stuff in 2019. And they employed me, yay! With first employee for QSEC in 2019, we had the strategy, and $1 million was released from the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training to help us to form what these ideas were out of the strategy and to help us to move forward. From there, we ran a series of regional programs. The first social enterprise grants were released in 2020, and Social Traders had the first social enterprise procurement pilot. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Alex? Yeah, so that was a pilot to work with Queensland Government Procurement on activating what they had put into the Queensland procurement policy in 2018 to support disadvantaged Queenslanders by buying more from social enterprises. So that's still in the current procurement policy 2021, and we had a year pilot. We're now in phase 3 of that project, and have worked across every government department and some stat bodies and owned corporations to help them activate the policy intent that is to buy more from genuine quality social enterprises. So that started in 2020 and continues to today, which is another positive sign for the sector.
And soon after that, the $8 million jobs fund, Social Enterprise Jobs Fund, SEJF, as we lovingly call it, was released, and it was a 2-year program that was co-designed by the sector to really help understand how we might be able to move the social enterprise sector along, and particularly fill positions and jobs for marginalised or people who've been underserved in the jobs market previously. So we're coming to the end of that in this next little period. And we're looking to see what's next, because from that moment, we had the Social Enterprise World Forum land here in September last year. And in amongst that amazing flurry of activation, and I cannot tell you how many places we've travelled to this year and last, really helping to understand and underpin what the development and maturity level of social enterprises and networks are across regional Queensland. It's been incredible. And as we're coming to the end of this fabulous 2-year fund, it's going to be really interesting for us all to take stock as to what we've actually achieved over this time. And by hopefully building this timeline out, we can actually see that, you know, each step has got us further along the way, and we've done it all together. And, you know, yes, we've got our 10-year anniversary this year, but this journey is not just 10 years old. This journey's been really well, robustly walked by many, 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 many people along the way. And we're just really trying to make sense of it all and look to the future. This last 10 years and then the 10 years before that, we're now looking at a horizon for 2032, obviously, for the Olympics. But beyond that, even 10 years after that, what is it that we want to see from the social enterprise sector? How do we want to grow as a movement for change? What number of businesses can we gather in our flock and to really help everybody reach those targets for the social enterprise, for the sustainable development goals, and really spread the word that social enterprise is where it's at if we want to really make a big deal of difference in sector and systems change into the future. Oh, that was the timeline. We have to speed up now, Alex. So the big picture estimates in Queensland, we just wanted to very quickly underpin this. So 60% of social enterprises are based outside of the Brisbane metro area, which is really important for us. Like, we've got a big crew of people that sit in southeast Queensland, and then 40% again out in further flung regions. So it's really important for us to get out into the regions and to talk to people and to really understand what's happening out there. And more than 10% of our businesses are Indigenous owned, which is super important. When you put it beside business as usual, is like 1%. So Indigenous businesses are really going off. They're amazing. And they're really lifting the game and the bar for all of us to learn from and to grow. More than 50%, more than half of our members, sometimes it's up to 60%, depending on which day you look at it, are female owned. Women are also lifting the bar. We're really leaning into this space, and we can see that if we keep growing the way that we are at the moment, we could reach around 1,000 or more social enterprises in Queensland. We know from Social Enterprise Australia, the work that they've done, the research suggests that there's 2,000 social enterprises out there. We love to see more social enterprises, not just join QSEC, but join the movement and really stand up and be counted. With $3.84 billion of economic output being generated by those organisations and 37,000 estimated jobs in those 2,000 social enterprises, we just know that social enterprises are really lifting above their weight in terms of employment outcomes, in terms of benefits back to communities. And if we put our multiplier, our very basic multiplier of about 1 in 3, every dollar spent in a social enterprise turns magically into about 3 as a local contributor. We know that social enterprises offer so much more than that back to communities. We just don't have the data. And that's one of the big things that we want to try and lean into in the next few years. Alex, what about the pace and the data out of certified social enterprises?
Yeah, so some data we do have, and for those that haven't certified, we'd encourage you to do so. We've got 103 certified enterprises in Queensland and over 500 nationally. We can see from the certification data that 83% are growing in total revenue between their certification periods, which might be 1, 2 or 3 years, depending on the enterprise. And these 103 are employing nearly 10,000 people. including 3,000 disadvantaged Queenslanders. So in terms of trying to get government to stand up and notice and pay attention to this sector, that's a pretty significant contribution, and it's fantastic to see the estimates that we get from SEA and that broader potential that it shows. This is actually what we know to be true through the verification process and team that we've got in certification. And that investment, that those 3,000 disadvantaged Queenslanders are being invested in the tune of nearly $100 million a year. So we like to take these sorts of figures, and this session's called Making It Count. So it's about the data. It's about how do we as a sector come together around this, show the worth of social enterprises to the government, and try to, I suppose, paint the picture of why it's worthwhile to invest in these businesses. But it is only half the story. 53% are employment generating social enterprises, which means that the 47% are not employment generating. They are existing to meet community needs or to provide charitable donations, which is interesting too. And that kind of accumulates up to $160 million of investment per year from the Queensland certified social enterprises into their impact costs.
Yeah, and we'd like to also echo those sentiments. You know, the more people that get certified, the more data we get. You know, it's a really great opportunity at the moment. We have an understanding with social traders that any QSEC member can take up their first year of certification free with social traders. So it's a really great opportunity to test what the veracity of your programs and what you're delivering as well, so that you can stand there hand on heart and say yes. So talking about that other half of the story that Alex was talking about, the non-employment side, there is obviously employment embedded in many social enterprises. But as you can see with our figures around regionality, we've got a lot of social enterprises, and some of them are quite small out in those regional centres. And just taking the example of the Central Highlands Social Enterprise Alliance, which is a group of social enterprises in Emerald that have come together, you can see that they're not just looking at employment. In fact, employment on their vision statement is down the bottom. What they're really looking at solving are issues around health, food distribution, transportation, housing. Like, these are very important things in regional centres and actually build regional resilience. And, you know, that economic drive that we need has to be embedded within services and creation of opportunities for regional centres. And that's really what that other half of the story looks like. It's not just about the employment figures, because that's just, again, that single bottom line reductionist sort of look. Here's what the jobs and growth says. That's great. But all the extra benefits that you get when you purchase from a social enterprise needs to be highlighted. We're not just talking about jobs. Yes, jobs are great, but the health of a community, the access and availability of health services, transportation, which is so difficult in regional centres. These social enterprises are really leaning into this space. So when we talk about social procurement, big wins, we ran a program through the regional work that we did in 2020 and 21 called Reset and Recovery with one of our, you know, real key partners, Central Queensland University, alongside social traders and a number of really good leading social enterprise sector developers in our state. We ran these programs to really try and understand some key areas for development and support for capability and capacity building. One of these projects that came up was with Rockhampton Regional Council, and Central Queensland University really lent into this space. They wanted to set up a waste stream facility, but they thought that this was going to be a problem solver just around the waste streams. A lot of the plastics and a lot of the recyclables, which were being sent off shore through COVID, prior to COVID and prior to China sort of saying, no, you can't, were actually landing in regional areas, and they needed to come up with some solutions. So Central Queensland University helped to understand what the scope of the project was, and also really drove a large range of providers to look at social enterprise solutions for that area. That whole tender process was initiated through Rockhampton Regional Council. They landed on Resource Recovery Australia, which is a great major national social enterprise to run the waste facility, and they ended up having a deal with Multicultural Australia, who are currently, they're a member of QSEC, but they run a Skilling Queensland's for Work program, and they're putting people through their paces, giving people from migrant and refugee backgrounds a really great start. They're building community cohesion, and they've got those jobs flowing, but they're also doing the waste stream. So that's the and conversation that is really lent into in regional Queensland is what we find. It was great to see the Minister actually out exploring that facility just at the end of last year. I think she went out to have a look. So Alex, your turn.
And back to the data and making it count. You know, there's some amazing, that brings that story of Elise's and that regional activation program really brings it to life as to what these sorts of examples are that we're talking about. From the 5 years of collecting information from both social enterprises and business and government members, we can see that, actually see a typo there, apologies, but it's 607 million, and I wrote it, so my fault. 607 million has been spent over those 5 years. And this was quite hot off the press when we did it. We're just about to publish our impact report to be able to dive into kind of all of the different impact areas that has created. 14% of that has occurred in Queensland, and we're seeing that trajectory go in the right direction from 5% to 11% to 14% over the last 3 financial years. And it's generated, or it's supported through social enterprises. So social enterprises, through winning that work from business and government members, have supported 3,397 full-time equivalent annualised hours of work, 1,505 pathway outcomes to further employment and study, 551,000 hours of training, $20.8 million of community services, $6.3 million worth of funds donated to charitable purposes, and 8,335 tonnes of waste diverted from landfill. And so this is from goods and services that these business and government members were going to be buying anyway. So this is that's the additional value that social enterprises bring to the table when these business and government members divert their spend to social enterprises, which is we like to think evidence enough, hopefully, that more and more governments and big business should be shifting some spend to social enterprise.
Oh, those stats, you know, I'm a stat girl. They make my skin go woo. And we should all be celebrating those, you know, those points. You know, that's just incredible, the amount of impact that can be generated through procurement. It's super exciting. So where are we at? So we're looking here in 2023. We do know that there are some pretty big headwinds coming along with some economic downturns, but and that might be in the next 6 months, could be the next 12 months, a year or two away of some pretty significant economic challenges for not just small business, but for communities as well. We would like to think that social enterprise could lend a hand in that space. We know that sustainability is on the top of everybody's mind at the moment with net zero carbon emissions in 2030 coming along. We've really got to get our skates on in terms of addressing climate change issues. But more importantly, we've also got the ESGs, which are actually becoming much more prevalent in Europe and overseas. We will see that happen here, that we will need to have some compliance around how we're responding to environment, social and governance outcomes and frameworks that we need to respond to. That is coming very soon. So we all need to start measuring our impact. We all need to start leaning into this space and really demonstrating how we can make a difference through turning our trade. As I mentioned, we've got the Olympics coming up in 2032, but really what we want to achieve is the global goals at the end of the day. And that should be our long-term goal. So we have some leverage points that we can use along this next 10 to 20 year horizon. There are some really great platforms and things that we can use, but we need to keep our mind fixed on the systems change approach, which will help us achieve some just outcomes for our society going forward. So that almost wraps up our session today. Alex, have you got any thoughts that you wanted to highlight over, in summary, over what we've just spoken about?
I think just reflecting that and in preparing this together, we talked a lot about how great it is to take stock at this moment and look back, and then also look forward, like you've just done, in terms of going through how we've got to this point, and also as a group, as a sector, looking forward as to how we come together and work most efficiently and effectively for our combined goals for, impact, a more inclusive, equitable, more sustainable Australia. So I think that's it's a really nice moment to celebrate QSEC and the 10 years gone, but also to look forward together. So just thanks to QSEC for putting this on, and Westpac Foundation for supporting it, and for everyone for either listening in or turning up.
Thank you so much. And before we wrap up, I'd also like to say thanks to Alex for, his collegiate position on this. We've really worked very hard together to try and tease out some of the major milestones. But, as we've done this session, we've actually learned that there's much more that we need to fit in there. So I would like to then in turn invite anyone on this call, and also who's watching later, to help us to highlight what's been going on in the sector. What other milestones? I know from the university's perspective, there's some really good things that they want to add in, some of the milestones that they think that universities in education has lent a hand in. So after the session, we'll be distributing the history pin link. So we're inviting everybody to put their voice to this timeline. We are going to publish something. In the annual report this year that will be the timeline. So it will be good to get everyone's voice connected, and really working hard to understand who are the people, who are the actors, who are the change makers, what programs, what initiatives have really helped shape social enterprise across these last few years and into the future. We can now have a little throw to the group. Rob, you've got your hand up. What would you like to say?
No, I just wanted to personally thank both you and Alex for putting this on. It's great. It is, as Alex was saying, good opportunity to look back and also look forward, and some of the things that probably under the scenes that happened that weren't touched on. Wanted to recognise Lisa Saganto's work when she put together a breakfast meeting sort of thing, because in these sort of movements where resources are scarce, you do tend to get some elbowing out of the way for those scarce resources, and Lisa Saganto was instrumental in bringing together a couple of the sort of powerhouses at the time to have breakfast, and that was where the bid for what they call it, but the World Forum, and a few other things. She brought them together, which was really important. But importantly, as we were looking forward, systems wasn't spoken about back in the early days. I remember having some robust debates with David Brooks, and he said, what's this system stuff about? That's not what social enterprise is about. Now we're moving really into that system space. And importantly, as QSEC being the first member driven representation of social enterprises, has really been instrumental nationally in terms of driving that membership, the lived experience of the people who are doing the hard work, bringing that up into conversations at that higher level. And this is now driving I'm a part of a national organisation that is now putting together accelerators for investors, not for the social enterprises. So there's now this much greater visibility on the sector that we represent is where the best information on how we can grow and meet these challenges, as Elise was talking about. They are phenomenal, these challenges that we're looking at, environmental, economic, and we're living in them at the moment. And I suppose, one of the things, the heartfelt things is despite the struggle, every foot you put forward in this space of having impact is so important, it's so critical. And even if you fall over and deemed in the Western world as a failure, that's still a success. It's sort of like deciding which hill you're going to die on, the one that is taking the world over a cliff, or the one that's really putting great things in place for our you know, for humanity right now, you know, not to mention our grandkids. So thanks for putting on, Alex and Elise.
No worries, Rob. Thank you so much for, that was Rob Pekin from the Food Connect Foundation and Shed, which we had our party at so successfully a couple of weeks ago. And Rob's been a real stalwart and a founder of this movement as well. And it's great to have his voice at this table too. So thank you, Rob, for sharing. Is anyone else want to say anything? Janie?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm from Native Bees in a Box in the Sunshine Coast. The goal is to help increase the native bee population in this area, but it's getting bigger all the time because it's now about biodiversity as well, and introducing the people that I'm working with the bees into the whole concept of biodiversity, which is what bees are obviously a very important part of. Anyway, the question I've got is there used to be a grant for social enterprises, which I am, and that was available last year, and it doesn't seem to be available this year. So because we've been talking about the $8 million, why is the grant for startups disappeared?
Yeah, so a lot of the initiatives that were rolled out are one-offs at this stage. So the things that we had planned over that period of time to utilise the $8 million, you know, the government only has this much string, and we've got to cut it up for this much opportunity and the broad depth of the social enterprise movement. We can't do all things. So we've had to be quite specific about the timing and also unlocking the opportunities that come up for everyone, and being mindful that, you know, yes, it's an emerging sector. Yes, we need startup funding, but we also need funding for people to scale and grow, and also for sector leaders to go out into areas that have not had the opportunity to actually learn and connect and engage prior. So there's been funding allocated that has been sector driven by the sector leaders, saying, well, these are the parts that we need to fund. And we're working really hard with government to understand what we might be able to unlock into the future. As I said, the $8 million worth of funds are due to be spent by the end of June. I think there is some funding still outstanding with some of the sector leaders' funds that might be expended by September. There's some evaluation work and some research work that is still yet to be done around what did this $8 million provide, and how did we help grow the sector? Do we help grow the sector? Has there been enough movement? And from that evaluation point, the government then would like to re-enter and re-engage in our conversation to say, well, what might happen next? Is it the government's role? Is it
Sorry. Yeah.
Oops. Sorry, Janie, we might actually take that question offline due to the timing. But thank you for your weigh in there. We are working really hard to try and understand what that might look like going forward. So given that we've got 10 minutes to go for conversation, I might stop the recording now. So thank you very much for those of you watching online.